All right, good afternoon, everyone. Today, we have the pleasure to welcome Dr. Carlos Lange Bassani for our seminar series. Dr. Bassani has a dual PhD degree in Mechanical and Chemical Engineering from the Federal University of Technology, Paraná, Brazil, and Mines Saint-Étienne, University of Lyon, France, and is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute for Multiscale Simulation at the Friedrich-Alexander-University, Erlangen-Nuremberg, Germany, sponsored by the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. His research focuses on the multi-scale coupling between molecular scales, the emergence of mesomorphology, and their consequences to macro applications applied to nanocrystals and their assemblies, and clathrate hydrates growth, agglomeration, and dispersion in multi-phase flow. So once again, welcome, Dr. Bassani. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, and please feel free to start presentation.
Thank you, Arthur, and thank you, Professor Tavares, for the invitation. Let me share the screen, and thanks for everyone to join today. So yeah, today I want to. So can you just let me know, Arthur? Can you hear me well?
Yeah, it works perfectly. I can see the slides as well.
Perfect. So yeah, thank you very much. And today I want to talk about this topic that I've been looking since I arrived here in Germany for the past 2 years. I'm doing now a postdoctoral research fellowship here. And it's about the emergence of mesomorphology from molecular ordering. I will be talking about two systems, faceted nanocrystals and porous clathrate hydrates, but I believe they are similar in certain ways, right? And just trying to change the slide here, gone. So first, let's define what emergence is. And well, emergence is understanding something that emerged from basic principles that emerge into a structure, into something in a larger scale, and that can have different pathways and different ways of happening, right? We know from both materials, and that's classical statistical mechanics. If we have atoms, we have molecules. We know the periodic table, right? We know all the wave functions, Schrodinger equation. And then it comes the work of Boltzmann, right? So all these fluctuations, all the Brownian motion, how we do sample the microstates, entropy, and then we have all these fluctuations. And if we just think about a bulk material, no defects, no interfaces, then we can estimate properties. For example, mass diffusivity, momentum diffusivity, also known as viscosity, and thermal diffusivity, which relates to thermal conductivity, right? If now we think about some mesomorphology, some scales that happen in between the molecule, the atoms, and the macro applications, the macro scale. So we can think about interfaces, defects, geometric frustration, right? All the fields that appear, concentration fields, temperature fields that will arise in scales larger than atoms, molecules, and the fluctuations. Then we start emerging structures, and I put here, I change inorganic and organic structures, just the level of complexity, right? And then in inorganic elements, we can find some static structures, faceted crystals, dendrites, porous medium, and I'm putting here a lot of crystals because that's what I study. And if we go even a little bit more on the complexity, then we are talking about long chains, organic materials. So when we're talking about long chains, they can fold, proteins can fold, and this rise a lot the complexity, and we can find some hierarchical materials, right? So for example, the organelles of the cells, the tissues, organs, up to the bodies of living matter, and then we have dynamic structures, right? This is not the topic today. I'll focus here on the inorganic structures. And I'm doing a lot of crystals in the past years. And crystals, they manifest mainly in three emergent shapes, right? So we can call faceted crystals, dendrites, and porous medium, porous patterns, right? And of course, there is an increasing level of complexity here, an increasing level of coupling between molecular, meso, and macro scales. So facets, they form in low driving forces when there is this layer by layer growth of the crystals, usually happening in a crystallization from a melt. For example, water forming ice, that's crystallization from a melt, or liquid metal forming a solid metal. So there's a solidification process. And usually these facets, they will form in well-behaved materials, and one big material, one big portion of the literature now is looking at noble metals, and we can have a lot of accuracy in the shape. And that has a new niche from the past 20 years. People are looking into new nanomaterials, nanocrystal assemblies, right? Then we go to the next level of complexity, dendrites, happening at intermediary driving forces. So here, usually crystallization is from a solution, and then the basic example here is a snowflake. So water in the form of vapor inside air, and then only the water will crystallize, but the concentration is very low, so this triggers mass transfer limitation, and these patterned structures here of the dendrites, like these tree-looking emergent structures, they happen because of the Gibbs-Thompson effect, which is basically chemical potential changing in a curvature. And if we go a little bit more complex into high driving forces, where nucleation occurs in a very high driving force, so there's a multi-site nucleation in 3D with a lot of competition in this mass transfer limitation, then we have a catastrophic phase separation forming a porous medium. So today I want to talk about facets. Facets, of course, they are the most comprised, most understood or comprehended in the literature. But we are now reevaluating again because we can achieve a lot of accuracy in shape. So we need better models. And I want to talk a little bit more about these facets for noble metals, and also in the other side, in the other extreme, porous patterns, now looking at Clathrate hydrates and all clean energy aspects that we can have with Clathrate hydrates. So the first part of the talk, faceted nanocrystals, and the reason why nanomaterials, right? So we know now around the past 20 to 30 years, we know how to synthesize atoms into nanocrystals, and those are 50 nanometers to 100 nanometers in size, and we can form very precise shapes and different shapes, right? And then we can take these nanocrystals and assemble them in superstructures. So now it's a crystal made out of nanocrystals. So that's called a superstructure. And this is a new material with properties that, well, some of the properties we've never seen before. And then there are several coming applications for that, quantum dots, right? So in this display technology, probably already seen new TVs using quantum dots. And this was the Nobel Prize of Chemistry 23 on quantum dots, sensing with plasmonics, photonics, so negative refracted indices, and a lot of catalysis and clean energy, right? Well, there is a big analogy here in the literature between atoms and nanocrystals. So if we look at the past century, one of the big discoveries was the atom model by Bohr, and then Linus Pauling looking at interactions, and then all material sciences looking at phase diagrams, how we can form different crystals, and and then we have this rise in technology in the past century, right? If we look back 100 years ago, we had like really bad cars. We didn't have any semiconducting materials that give rise to computer technology, right? And now the next level that material scientists are looking forward is this new level, this superstructure. So where we have cores, nanocrystal cores, we can functionalize with ligands, and now we form a building block very like an atom. And these building blocks, they interact and they form these superlattices. So Well, the community is trying to find, is there a periodic table for nanocrystals? And if you want to know more about that, we just have now a paper with a collaborative paper with many co-authors in the literature that's in press in ACS Nano, so probably in the next weeks will be online. What I want to focus here is on this core, so why these shapes form, and it's very important to be precise in the shape. So this is going to give the anisotropy of interactions between these nanocrystals, and also will dictate the length scale of the superlattice length. And well, why shapes form? The prevailing idea in literature are the wolf shapes. This is a equilibrium hypothesis. So these facets, they will form in order to prioritize facets with lower surface energy, with lower surface tension. But there's actually things happen on the go, and we can see even like the same system, gold nanoparticles, for example, can have a big variety of shapes: cubes, rhombic dodecahedra, octahedra, decaedra, dodecahedra, icosahedra, and so on. And all of them form in very similar conditions. An equilibrium wolf shape would be the same, but we have other shapes that they are kinetically entrapped in local energy minimum. And the hypothesis here, and this is also from literature, facets with a slower growth velocity, they prevail, and they bound the nanocrystal shape. And then we have models in literature that we can see from the velocity ratio between the different crystalline directions, crystallographic directions, we can form different nanocrystal shapes. Why these growth velocities, they change? Well, they have to do with the bond energy, well, the potential energy of the element, the geometry of the crystalline structure, the presence of ligands and ions that they can change. They can cap or direct diffusion into some sides of the nanocrystal surface, and so on, right? I will not be talking today on the chemistry part of how, so you can find in this paper I just showed you, you can find a little bit more on the chemistry side. Today I want to tell I want to show you how these shapes form, thinking about if we know energy, how we go to shape. And for that, what we propose is a rejection-free kinetic Monte Carlo code. What we do is, well, first we insert an atom in the simulation domain, and then we consider a perfect FCC lattice, and we consider that the next atom can be grown into one of these 12 positions that define this face-centered cubic lattice. And the way we sample, if we decide where the new atom is going to be grown, well, is using a Boltzmann factor, right? So there is an energy level. I'm going to talk you what is the energy I'm considering, and there is a temperature. So there's a Boltzmann factor. And then we can start growing atoms. And here, right, the colors here are changing. It means that the energy level is changing. And if we keep doing that, we will see a nanocrystal form, a nanocrystal shape arising. This is very fast. This code is very fast, so we can achieve realistic size nanocrystals, so tens to hundreds of nanometers. This means millions to tens of millions of atoms, and we can still have information at the atomic scale, right? So the same way we grow atoms, we can also dissolve atoms, and so let the structure heal. The first thing I think, and probably everyone here is curious, is what is the influence of temperature, right? That is the basic thing any thermodynamicist will ask first. And actually here what we are telling here is just this ratio between the bond energy, the potential energy between two atoms and the temperature. If we change this ratio, right, we can have the surface roughening transition, so between smooth and roughened, start rounding the tips and the edges. Then we start rounding the whole nanocrystal until a point where the nanocrystal is simply a sphere. Well, why this happens? Whenever the bond energy is very high compared to the temperature, so the atoms, they will always try to find the sites that maximize the number of bonds, and these will form facets. So this is the layer by layer growth of mode growth of a crystal, right? And whenever this bond energy is small compared to the temperature, what happens is that, well, these atoms, they don't prefer so much the sites in the crystalline structure that prioritize the number of bonds. So we start forming these growth islands and roughening until a point where the growth is completely random. It's just isotropic, and we form a sphere, right? So, well, temperature is mostly then related to this roughening transition, but it doesn't describe any shape transformation. And then we need another hypothesis here, is that, well, first we consider that we are not considering any energetic model, just considering that the energy increases linearly with the number of nearest neighbors. In an FCC crystal, we can have up to 12 atoms around. And we are just saying, well, this energy increases linearly. This is similar to considering a Lennard-Jones potential energy model, truncated in the first neighbors, right? And then the second hypothesis is, well, we are using Terrace-Stepkin crystallization, which says that the first atom that is going to nucleate over this perfect surface is going to have the lowest coordination number, lowest energy. And this is also what limits the growth. So what we do, we bias the coordination numbers of these two levels here, of these three levels, actually 3, 4, and 5. Those are the add-atom nucleation. These represent add-atom nucleation in the three crystalline crystallographic directions, which are 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, and 1, 1, 1. Those are the three main ones. And we want to check if a new shape arises. And well, surprise, surprise, of course it arises. Otherwise, I will not be showing you this today. And those are simulations, and we can see here these different shapes forming, right? Octahedrons, cubes, rhombic dodecahedron. Difference here, for example, these three first ones, we only grow atoms. In order to form the 1, 1, 0 facets, we also need to dissolve some atoms and let the shape heal, and it will find a different shape, a different local medium. Those are simulations for 1 million atoms, right? Around 20 nanometers, it would be the size of the nanocrystal. So this is realistic, and then with those hypotheses in my computer, it only takes 1 minute to throw one of the simulations, and so it's very fast. So it's very important to understand here, we are not, in these simulations, we do not change any energy level of the higher coordination numbers. That represents, for example, 12 is a bulk atom inside of the nanocrystal. And from 7 to 9, those are the atoms that are exposed in the facets. So it means the energy of the facets is exactly the same, right? And if we take these same simulations and we color them by the energy level, we see different energy level. For example, this orange that is tending to the red, warmer colors, it has a larger energy than the ones that have blue color. So all of these shapes, they have a different total energy, but they're still stable. So we say those are kinetically entrapped shapes. Those are kinetic wolf shapes. So we do some mapping of these shapes, and I call this a shape diagram, not to be confused with a phase diagram, right? So the phase here is always FCC, face-centered cubic. The shape is different, however. And this map here, we are only growing atoms. We are not dissolving, and we see there is a region of octahedrons, region of cubes, and there is this green zone here of all these truncated shapes between cubes and octahedron. And we even can find some isolines here. Those are Archimedean solids. So for example, this one has a special name. This is a cuboctahedron. This is a truncated cube. This is a truncated octahedron, right? So they have special names. They have special definitions in mathematics. And well, we can find here the position, the isolines where they form. If we allow some dissolution events, so this nanocrystals, they are growing, but they are also healing. So some of the sites with higher energy, they're all going to be dissolved. Then we find in this, if we look at the difference, instead of this gray zone that are just rough surfaces, it gives rise now to these 110 facets, these orange facets. And if we zoom in here, we'll find many of these truncations, and some of them are Archimedean solids as well. This one is called a rhombic cuboctahedron. This one is called a truncated cuboctahedron, right? So many fancy names. Doesn't matter, the names doesn't matter. What matters here is that now we can, with this kind of simulation, this simulation already existed, but now we are using this type of simulation to sample transition states, right? Growth and dissolution events. And with the correct data structure, with the correct coding, then we can have this emergence of faceted nanocrystal with realistic size, right? We can capture all these kinetically entrapped shapes and reproduce many of the shapes. And the big conclusion here, whenever we are dealing with these low ratios between high ratios between bond energy and temperature, that they form facets, we can assume this layer by layer mold growth, which is also called terrace step king crystallization. And the main factors here to understand what is the shape that is going to rise is associated to the level energy, associated to this topological size in the nanocrystal surface, especially the adatom nucleation, right? So those, if we come back here to the shape diagrams, those are the energy levels 3, 4, and 5 for FCC, right? So this is a very well-behaved system, right? That happens in this noble metals. It might happen also if we can crystallize noble gases. Well, of course, they don't crystallize so easily. But then now I want to go to the other side, porous medium, and which is a bit more complex. Still, a lot of these concepts of the way of thinking is still very similar, but the mechanisms of molecular attachment are different. And I want to talk about Clathrate hydrates because they form porous medium, right? So Clathrate hydrates, they have this crystalline structure made out of cages. So in every edge, in every tip here of this cage, imagine there is a molecule of water. And the molecule of water always hydrogen bond with the other molecules of water. And there are in the total 4 bonds. So they are tetrahedron bonds. And then inside of these cages, there is a molecule of a gas molecule. It can be a very small gas, oxygen, nitrogen, a small hydrocarbon, methane, ethane, propane, carbon dioxide. And this small molecule in this cage is rotating and translating and stabilizing this cage. And depending on the types of cages, we form different crystalline structures, right? So this is a very complex system. I mean, this unit cell is very large, composed of many atoms. It is a big component made of a gas and a host molecule. It usually forms a porous medium. So why people are studying these? A lot because of curiosity. It's a complex system, but also because it has a high capacity of gas storage. So it makes a very prominent material to store carbon dioxide under the ocean in large quantities. So looking towards the global warming problem. We also have methane stored in naturally occurring clathrate hydrates in the permafrost in the ocean, so we can extract methane as a new energy source. And in the oil industry, these clathrate hydrates, they also form inside of production pipelines. And currently we deal by simply injecting a lot of chemicals to reduce, to never form these clathrate hydrates. But if we deal with the clathrate hydrates, as long as, if we let hydrates form, but we deal with the agglomeration, we can produce hydrocarbons with clathrate hydrates and still reduce chemicals. So in all this oil and gas industry, we are also looking towards producing oil and gas in a more efficient way, reducing the chemicals, right? Also looking at this greener production. This system is very complex compared to these nanocrystals of noble metals that I showed to you, right? We are talking about binary component crystals, so a guest and a host. And this gas molecule, especially literature is looking a lot to methane for oil and gas production, and carbon dioxide for this carbon storage. And those are very lowly soluble in water. And these cause a very high mass transfer limitation mechanism that spans over several scales. So whenever we talk about molecules, we cannot talk about molecules only. We need to talk about the field of concentration happening in the hundreds of nanometer. So we need a multi-scale understanding of how all this happens together, right? So here is very important to define now what are the different morphologies we have in different scales. People looking at the atomic scales, they will be looking at molecules, surfactants, additives, the structures. When we talk about mesomorphology in the hundreds of nanometers, so this is much, much larger, right? We are talking about facets that we already talked, the dendrites and the porous medium that I'm going to talk next. And if we go to the macro applications, we are going to talk about, we are going to be in the millimeter to the meter scale. We'll be talking about particles, agglomerates, deposits, if these particles, they flow or not, right? And well, you can find more. This is a new paper just coming out, and it's a perspective paper. So many of the ideas I'm sharing here today with you comes from this paper on the Journal of Chemical Physics, right? And this paper is going to talk about the microstructure up to the mesomorphology. If you want to check also what happens from the mesomorphology to the macro application, we have some papers here looking. When I was working in Brazil, we were looking at these gas hydrate plugs formed in the oil and gas industry. We wanted to come up with a model that prevents plugging. And if we are producing in a flow line in the kilometer scale, what we need to look is, are these particles going to agglomerate and settle down? And then we need to go one scale lower. Those, if we ask, when does these particles agglomerate? The answer is when there is a liquid bridge. And then we ask, when does this liquid bridge happens? And the answer is a scale lower, is in the porous medium. This bridge only happens during the time scale this pore is open and the water can go out. Once the pores, they close, there is no agglomeration anymore. So all of these coupling between the pore scale, the particle scale, the agglomeration and the flow, you can find, there is a series of papers here. So there's one only talking about the mechanisms, one talking about the mathematics at the pore scale, the growth kinetics at the pore scale, one talking about the population balance of agglomeration, one talking about the multi-phase flow, and there is one talking about how we transfer all this knowledge into the industry in a fairly simple but robust model. So this series of papers, it gained some recognition in some prizes of thesis, and also in the Clathrates community. But I mean, everyone here that does models, that does simulations, you know, every model has a weak point, and the weak point in this model is the porous medium. How the porous medium forms, how the porous medium evolves. And that's exactly why I came to Germany to study that. And then at some point, I started studying FCC nanocrystal because they are just more behaved, right? But if we look at Clathrate hydrates, and then we have facets and dendrites, but those only forms in laboratory conditions in very slow crystallization of high soluble gases. And if we go to a macro application, they never happen. What happens is a porous medium, right? And if we want to understand why porous medium forms, well, we need to understand the mechanism. So this paper that I showed you, this new paper in the Journal of Chemical Physics, we discussed these. There is not yet an experimental proof. So that is this is a perspective paper. So we imagine that this happens, right? In Clathrate hydrates, we always have a supersaturated solution where the molecules are, the ratio of water to methane molecules about 1,000, right? Here at 4 degrees Celsius, 100 bar. But when it crystallizes, we have much more methane molecules to water, right? So this value here is very drastic. And what happens that nucleation occurs, it takes really a long time to occur. Even if this solution is super saturated, and sometimes for the experimentalists here today in the audience that do Clathrate hydrates, they know sometimes it's very hard to form Clathrate hydrates. Sometimes we are 10 degrees below the equilibrium temperature and we wait for hours and we just need to go home because hydrates never form. And I think everyone that did experiments here, they know that this happens, right? And this is super saturated, and then stochastically it happens. And then once it happens, it takes only a few seconds and we form hydrates in all the system, right? So the way we understand this is this multi-site nucleation. So there is the coexistence, because we are in a supersaturated solution, there is the coexistence of many nuclei that they are very close to the critical size, but they never trespass the nucleation barrier. And the moment the first one trespass, let's say this one, it propagates a perturbation, and this perturbation propagates much faster than a heat wave or a mass transfer wave. It's just a perturbation. And this perturbation will cause all the other nuclei in the system to decide whether they nucleate or not, whether they nucleate or they dissolve. And then there is a very fast competitive growth and merging of the seeds that exist, forming this porous pattern. One way of predicting this is through phase field model, right? And a phase field model exactly couples molecular scale with these mesoscales. So in the molecular scale, we have a landscape, a free energy landscape, that we need to minimize the whole free energy of the system. And this we need molecular dynamics to say, to predict exactly what is the stiffness here, the nucleation barrier. And then we also can have some thermodynamic models, equations of states to find the driving force, this delta mu. And in the other side, the phase field model also solves the concentration field in space. And so by minimizing the free energy from the molecular scale and solving the concentration field, then we can have the emergence of a porous medium in 3 dimensions. This work here is not for Clathrate hydrates. This is just how the equations they work. I'm not aware of any phase field model for Clathrate hydrates that predict porous medium. But as I said, this is more on the perspective side. It's feasible, right? So if we do that and we test sensitivity to different compositions, different temperatures, we will be able to find what is the size of the initial, what is an average size for the pore of the clathrates. So that would be one answer that we really need. The other one is how fast now this pore close, because after these pores form, the gas molecules, they constantly diffuse through these pores and they crystallize in the pore wall and they close the pore wall. And this pore constriction rate, it's very important for engineers, right? And we think about oil and gas, it will impact the liquid bridge agglomeration, and it will impact if a plug forms or not in the pipeline. If we think about carbon dioxide storage, it impacts the efficiency of how much we can store. And we can predict, today we can predict very well the diffusion. So this we need a diffusion crystallization problem. The diffusion part, we predict very well. We just need a fixed law with a diffusivity. But the crystallization not, because we need the crystalline growth velocity. And that's when we need to come back to the molecular scale, because crystallization is happening in the molecular scale. And now we are dealing with different mechanisms. So you remember I showed you this layer by layer growth mode of noble metals forming these facets. Now we are not dealing with noble metals anymore. We are dealing with water. So first thing, water has anisotropic interactions. So this known as Bernal-Fowler ice rules. So we need to orient water molecules in the correct way. So here I'm showing for ice. So this is not a Clathrate hydrate, it's just ice, but this happens in any structure that contains water. Second thing, when we talk about a bicomponent crystal, as Clathrate hydrates, we need to diffuse the gas molecules, right? So all this diffusion, especially when we are dealing with low concentration, it takes a lot of time. So the growth velocity will be affected. So the growth velocity will decrease. And there is a third phenomenon. We call it the gas-host cooperativity effect. In order for these rings of water to form that form the cages, we need some gas molecules blocking hydrogen bonding with the other water molecules in the surrounding. And here there's a video of a molecular dynamics simulation video from the literature. It's from a work from Professor Sum. I think he's here in the audience. And well, we can see here the gas molecules, blue and purple, they are stabilizing these ring motifs and forming a Clathrate cage here. So yeah, I mean, when we talk about Clathrate hydrates, these mechanisms of growth of layer by layer is not the same anymore, right? So we need to consider all of that. And yeah, we can do molecular dynamics. They are not the most simple ones to do, but people do it. And we can generate here this points here. Those are molecular dynamics simulations, sampling the crystalline growth velocity against the driving force. The subcooling is the driving force in terms of temperature. For different, so this is FCC, Lennard-Jones particles. They crystallize much faster than ice, and ice crystallize much faster than Clathrate hydrates. And those are orders of magnitude of difference. And the core reason why they crystallize slower is those three mechanisms that I showed you here, right? Ice, we only have this one, and in Clathrate hydrates, we have these other two, and they are the reason why it slows down. But now there is another question. If we want to transport these molecular dynamics to the mesoscale, we need an equation, a continuous equation that is simple, but able to capture. And in my understanding, the best fit here is the Wilson-Frankel law. So the growth velocity depends on energy minimization. So this Boltzmann factor here, right? The chemical potential, the driving force, receive many names here. It depends on diffusivity. This is the mean free path, and these F and D, they correlate to orientational ordering. So this is kind of a fitting parameter that will depend on the system, right? Why this Wilson-Frankel law is good? Well, it captures this curve trend here, and it's very simple to understand this curve trend. We have a zone of driving force limited, so this term here is limiting growth, and then the higher the subcooling, the faster the growth. But then if the subcooling is very high, temperature slows down and diffusivity goes down, and it starts limiting growth. And there will be a point where the growth is completely hindered, and that's the glass transition temperature. There will be a certain driving force where things cannot move anymore, and all the atoms will get stuck and form a glass. It will form an amorphous material. So the story here, and again, it's more on the perspective side, is that we need to do these molecular dynamic simulations, fit these kind of crystallization models, and then we can insert into pore constriction models and upscale that to what we have in agglomeration and what we have in industry, right? There's still a big path to do, right? And so again, is a perspective. And so just to conclude the second part, I talk a lot about this emergence of the porous patterns, focusing on low solubility gases, carbon dioxide and methane in water. So the clathrates and this, how is the coexistence of the molecular scale? How they think about the free energy landscape from the molecules and the concentration fields in the mesoscopic scales. And then I talk a lot about the pore constriction rate, focusing on how we use these molecular dynamics to find this continuous crystallization law, right? And just to finish here, to wrap it down, so all these emergence of mesomorphology, now I've been doing that for the past 2 years since the finishing of my PhD, and I think this is a very promising missing link between all this fundamental science that we know, atoms, molecules, clusters, we know potential energies, the elements, the periodic table, right, and all these fluctuations, Brownian motion from molecular dynamics, and then we go to the macro applications, and there is a lot of curve fitting, right, in the macro applications that we cannot fully connect with the fundamental science. And I think one of the missing links is understanding more thoroughly this emergence of the mesomorphology, so we can scale up from molecules to mesomorphology to the macro application, right? Well, of course, this work would not be possible without the help of a lot of people. Special thanks here goes to Michael Engel. He's the PI of the group in Germany. And we had a lot of discussions. He had a lot of very nice ideas in this faceted nanocrystals and how we code and make a code fast. And then to Professor Amadeu Sam, all of this Clathrate hydrate, he's an expert on Clathrate hydrates, all these molecular attachment mechanisms, a lot of his input, right? And to the students working in this project, and to many of other collaborators here that we are always discussing in conferences or just by doing some Zoom conferences. So thank you very much.